Why some people never feel like they belong. Have you ever walked through life with the unshakable sense that you don't quite fit in, that the world around you moves too fast, too shallow, and too loud, while something inside you longs for stillness, depth, and meaning? Maybe your family never really got you, or your friends say you feel too much, care too deeply, or seem too serious for your age. Perhaps you've always felt like an outsider looking in, as though life is a movie and you're just watching from the balcony. If this resonates, you may not be broken. You may simply be ancient. Because what we call an old soul is not a romantic metaphor. It's not spiritual fluff. It is the echo of lived experience, the kind that stretches beyond the boundaries of one lifetime. What is an old soul? A scientific spiritual intersection. Let's set the record straight. When people casually refer to someone as an old soul, they usually mean it as a compliment, someone who's thoughtful, calm, or mature beyond their years. Maybe they read classic literature instead of scrolling social media, or they'd rather stay in on a Friday night than hit the town. But the real concept of an old soul runs far deeper than personality quirks or lifestyle choices. It points to something timeless and mysterious. At its core, being an old soul means your consciousness has lived through many lifetimes, not metaphorically, literally, across different centuries, cultures, bodies, and sometimes even species. These are souls that have walked battlefields, knelt in temples, cradled babies in silence, and stood in front of crowds with voices trembling from truth. They've been kings and slaves, artists and soldiers, healers and wanderers. And with each life, they've gathered not just knowledge, but soul level refinement, an energetic maturity that can't be taught in a single lifetime. This isn't a fringe belief. The concept of soul reincarnation sits at the heart of several major spiritual traditions. In Hinduism and Buddhism, the soul, or Atman, passes through many incarnations to burn off karma and eventually reach liberation. In Kabbalistic Judaism, the concept of Gilgul refers to the soul's journey through multiple lives. Even early forms of Christianity, including the Gnostic texts, suggested a belief in soul evolution over lifetimes before it was later removed from Orthodox doctrine. But what's truly fascinating is how this ancient idea finds resonance in modern psychological thought. Take Carl Jung, one of the 20th century's most respected psychologists. His theory of the collective unconscious described a layer of the psyche that holds memories and patterns far beyond one individual's experience, shared across humanity and time. It's a concept eerily similar to the idea that our souls retain the impressions of past lives. Or consider Dr. Ian Stevenson, a psychiatrist from the University of Virginia. Over decades of work, he compiled more than 2,500 detailed case studies of children who spontaneously recalled past lives, with facts later confirmed by independent investigation. These were not vague impressions. These kids named towns, described events, even identified former family members, all without prior exposure. His research, though controversial, shook the scientific community and opened new doors for studying consciousness beyond the brain. Even in pop culture, we see glimpses of this. Consider figures like the Dalai Lama, believed by Tibetan Buddhists to reincarnate intentionally to continue his spiritual work, or Oprah Winfrey, who has openly discussed her strong sense of déjà vu and spiritual connection to ancient African traditions, or Nikola Tesla, whose visions and ideas often seem to transcend time, as if he were recalling discoveries rather than inventing them. The idea of the old soul challenges the modern view that we are just our biology, born, aging, dying, and gone. Instead, it suggests we are part of a much older, grander story, that each of us may carry echoes from centuries past, and that what we call intuition, wisdom, or sensitivity might actually be the voice of a self that remembers far more than this one life. In a world obsessed with what's new, fast, and flashy, the old soul stands quietly in the background, feeling everything, remembering everything, and waiting for others to remember too. The feeling of being out of place is a clue. Feeling like you don't belong is one of the most common yet most misunderstood spiritual experiences. For many old souls, this sensation doesn't show up later in life. It starts early. Some children quietly wrestle with it as young as 5 or 6. They feel strangely detached, like they've been dropped into a world that doesn't quite make sense, surrounded by customs, people, and even a time period that feels foreign. They might not be able to articulate it in words, but you'll hear things like, "Why do I feel so different from everyone else?" Or, "I don't think I'm supposed to be here." This isn't depression or defiance, it's often something deeper, a form of spiritual dissonance. Take someone like Keanu Reeves. He's famously reserved, introspective, and has openly described feeling disconnected from materialism and fame. He's said in interviews that he feels more at home in solitude and philosophy than in Hollywood parties. Many fans consider him an old soul because of that exact sense. He seems to exist slightly outside the cultural moment, quietly observing rather than seeking the spotlight. That feeling of being out of sync with the noise of the world is often a key clue. In spiritual psychology, this phenomenon is sometimes referred to as soul memory. It's the idea that even if your current brain can't recall your past lives, your consciousness does. It remembers in emotional flashes, unexplained preferences, and connections to people or places you've never met or visited. This memory doesn't arise from your logical brain, it comes from your energetic blueprint. That's why the longing can be so intense. It's not based on fantasy, it's based on recognition. And here's where it gets fascinating. This feeling is often paired with a deep fascination for things that are, on the surface, completely irrelevant to one's upbringing. A teenager raised in suburban Ohio might become obsessed with ancient Egypt. A child in California might sketch symbols from feudal Japan without ever learning Japanese history. A jazz musician might feel an inexplicable pull toward Indian ragas or Sufi poetry. Take Jim Morrison, the lead singer of The Doors. Long before his fame, he was deeply absorbed in Native American spirituality and ancient mythology. He often claimed to channel voices from other worlds and eras. His lyrics weren't just poetic, they were echoes, echoes of something older, something remembered. In clinical psychology, experiences like déjà vu or unexplained emotional responses are usually dismissed as neurological glitches or random emotional triggers. But from a soul based perspective, they may be much more. They're the resurfacing of echoes from previous lifetimes, subtle fragments seeking wholeness. Imagine the soul like a stained glass window, shattered and scattered across time. Each life is an attempt to gather those pieces again, to remember, to reintegrate, and to finally feel whole. When you sense that strange yearning for something lost, ancient, or out of reach, it's often your soul trying to locate those shards across time and space. So when someone says, "I don't feel like I belong here," don't rush to pathologize it. Sometimes it's not a crisis. Sometimes it's just a very old soul waking up. Signs you might be an old soul from lifetimes past. Identifying an old soul isn't like taking a quiz or matching symptoms to a diagnosis. It's more subtle than that, more emotional, energetic, and instinctive. But over the years, spiritual teachers, psychologists, and even cultural observers have noticed some very consistent patterns. These aren't just quirks, they're signatures of a consciousness that's walked this earth many times before. Um, let's start with one of the strongest indicators: profound empathy. If you're someone who feels the emotional temperature of a room the second you walk in without anyone saying a word, you might be carrying spiritual weight from more than one lifetime. Empaths often feel overwhelmed in crowded or emotionally chaotic spaces because they absorb more than most people realize. Think of someone like Princess Diana. Her presence had a calming effect. People opened up to her. She radiated a compassion that felt older than her years, almost ancestral. That deep, intuitive kindness is often a marker of soul maturity. Another sign? Unexplained sadness. Many old souls carry a sense of grief or longing that doesn't seem tied to anything in their current life. It's like a cosmic homesickness. Robin Williams, while celebrated for his comedic genius, was open about his melancholy. He often channeled emotional depths that felt far beyond his personal experience. For many old souls, that sadness isn't depression in the clinical sense. It's memory, it's resonance, it's the aching echo of lifetimes past. Old souls also tend to show existential awareness from a young age. While most kids are worried about toys or recess, some are asking, "Why do people die?" Or "Where was I before I was born?" These questions often arise before any exposure to philosophy or religion. Actor Joaquin Phoenix, for instance, grew up in a spiritually experimental family and has long been described as intense, thoughtful, and inwardly driven. His performances and interviews often reflect someone wrestling with life's biggest questions, not for show, but because that's who he is. Another telltale trait is an aversion to superficiality. Small talk, draining. Chasing trends or clout, exhausting. If you feel more energized by silence, meaningful conversation, or simply being in nature, you're not being antisocial. You're just not wired for surface level stimulation. It's not that old souls don't enjoy connection. They just crave something real, something rooted. That's why so many are drawn to classic literature, sacred music, or spiritual retreats. Anything that touches the timeless. Then there's the presence of recurring life patterns. Old souls often feel stuck in emotional loops, whether it's unhealthy relationships, abandonment themes, or constantly feeling not enough. It can feel like life is trying to teach the same lesson on repeat. These aren't coincidences, they're karmic feedback loops, unfinished business from past lives playing out again until they're healed. The pattern isn't there to punish you, it's there to wake you up. Intuitive knowing is another major sign. Old souls often just know things they haven't learned. They can pick up on dishonesty in conversation, see red flags others miss, or anticipate outcomes without any logical explanation. And it's not paranoia, it's remembrance. The wisdom you carry didn't come from books or degrees. It came from centuries of living, loving, losing, and learning. Lastly, there's the strange pull towards spiritual spaces. Temples, monasteries, sacred music, or ancient texts might stir something in you, a sense of homecoming. You may not have been raised religious at all, yet feel drawn to meditation, chanting, or sacred symbols. That's because your soul remembers. You may have lived as a monk, mystic, healer, or seeker in another life. And now, without anyone teaching you how, you slip into spiritual practices like you've been doing them forever. If many of these traits resonate with you, you're not imagining things. You're not too sensitive, too serious, or too much. You're likely just older on the inside. Past life clues, hidden in dreams, talents, and fears. When we think of past lives, most of us imagine ancient temples, robes, or stories of reincarnation whispered in faraway monasteries. But the clues to our previous existences often show up in far more ordinary places, in our dreams, our irrational fears, and our strange, unexplainable talents. These moments may seem random or odd, but for many old souls, they're the breadcrumbs that point to a much longer soul story. Let's start with the research. Dr. Ian Stevenson, a psychiatrist from the University of Virginia, spent over 4 decades studying children who spontaneously recalled past lives. He documented more than 2,500 cases worldwide, kids who could name towns they'd never visited, speak dialects they'd never heard, or describe historical events they couldn't possibly have learned. What made his research especially compelling was the fact that many of these memories were later verified through interviews, records, and even autopsy reports. In one famous case, a boy in India correctly identified his past life murder scene, his former wife, and even the exact amount of money he'd been owed before he died. But past life memories don't only surface in children. Adults often experience what we could call soul flashbacks in dreams, unexplained fears, or sudden bursts of ability. Let's talk about dreams. We've all had strange dreams, but there's a difference between your average flying through the sky dream and one that feels so vivid, emotionally charged, and real that you wake up in tears. These are the kinds of dreams where you know the layout of a city you've never been to, or you're grieving someone you've never met in this lifetime. When that happens, your subconscious may be pulling up images from a memory bank much older than your current life. Actor Ryan Gosling once shared in an interview that as a child he was obsessed with ancient Egypt, so much so that he believed he had lived a past life there. While that might sound like a stretch to skeptics, it's a common theme among old souls. That unexplained draw toward a culture or time period can be more than a curiosity, it can be a memory. Then there are the sudden, spontaneous talents. Some people sit down at a piano and just play. They've never taken a lesson, never read sheet music, but their fingers move as if they remember. Consider Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, who composed music before he could fully write. Or Akiane Kramarik, the child prodigy painter who began creating detailed spiritual art at age 4. These aren't just gifted kids. They may be souls picking up where they left off. And then there's fear. Not the fear of public speaking or tax season, but phobias that seem to come out of nowhere. Maybe you've had a lifelong fear of drowning, even though you've never had a near death experience in water, or you panic in enclosed spaces, but there's no memory of being trapped. Science often tries to explain these fears as learned behaviors or responses to trauma, but in many cases, there's simply no logical cause. In the reincarnation framework, these phobias could be soul imprints, leftover trauma from another life that hasn't yet been resolved. Finally, emotional flashbacks. Have you ever met someone for the first time and instantly felt love, distrust, or sorrow without any rational reason? That intensity is often the soul recognizing a person from another time. Your body may not remember, but your soul does. These flashes, whether emotional, visual, or physical, are subtle nudges from your deeper self saying, "You've been here before." So, while science may not have all the tools to measure soul memory yet, the evidence keeps showing up in the places we least expect: our beds, our gifts, our fears, and our hearts. The Akashic Records and the blueprint of the soul. The concept of the Akashic Records might sound mystical or even a little far-fetched at first glance, especially if you're hearing about it for the first time. But when we break it down, what we're really talking about is a spiritual database, a kind of energetic archive that holds the complete history of every soul, its lifetimes, choices, patterns, wounds, gifts, and lessons. This idea is central in many spiritual traditions, especially those rooted in Eastern and esoteric teachings. The Sanskrit word akasha means ether or spirit, the most subtle element that contains all others. Think of it like the cloud storage of the universe, but instead of files and photos, it holds the vibrational imprint of every experience your soul has ever had. Skilled readers, often referred to as Akashic practitioners, claim they can access these records through deep meditation, channeling, or prayer. They don't see the future in a fortune teller sense. Instead, they help you understand your spiritual patterns, why you keep facing the same struggles, why certain people reappear in your life, and what your soul may be here to work through. For instance, let's say you're someone who constantly battles issues around power and control. Through an Akashic reading, it might emerge that in a past life you were in a position of great authority, perhaps even a political leader who misused that power. Now, in this lifetime, your soul has chosen more humble circumstances, not as punishment, but as balance. This shift is your soul's attempt to learn empathy, humility, or the true meaning of service. On the flip side, consider someone like Oprah Winfrey. She's spoken openly about her belief in spiritual purpose and soul contracts. Coming from a background of poverty and trauma, she rose to become one of the most influential voices in the world, not just through media, but through healing, education, and empowerment. In many spiritual circles, this kind of life arc, rising from suffering to become a global guide, might suggest that her soul designed this incarnation very intentionally, possibly to complete a karmic cycle or fulfill a long standing purpose. The idea here isn't fatalism. The Akashic Records don't lock you into a destiny. They reflect your soul's curriculum, the themes you've chosen to explore again and again until you master them. And that process is deeply personal. One soul might choose a lifetime of physical illness to cultivate patience or spiritual strength. Another might incarnate into a war-torn region to develop courage, leadership, or non-attachment. Take someone like Nelson Mandela. He spent 27 years in prison, only to emerge with a heart full of forgiveness and a vision for unity. That kind of soul journey, enduring hardship to develop radical compassion, isn't random. It reflects what many would call a mature soul blueprint. As a soul evolves, its blueprint becomes more purposeful. Early incarnations may feel chaotic or reactionary, driven by instinct, survival, or ego. But over time, the soul begins to choose with intention. It starts asking not what do I want to get, but what do I need to learn and how can I serve? The Akashic Records offer a spiritual framework for understanding why we are the way we are, not just in personality, but in purpose. And when you recognize that your life may be part of a much longer arc, one designed for growth, healing, and awakening, it changes everything. You're not just living, you're remembering karma, repetition, and the purpose of rebirth. When people hear the word karma, they often picture cosmic justice, what goes around comes around. But in its deeper, truer form, karma isn't about punishment or reward. It's about balance, learning, and completion. It's the energetic cause and effect system that helps the soul evolve across lifetimes. Think of karma as a spiritual echo. Every action, intention, or lesson we initiate sends out a ripple. If that ripple hasn't been resolved, whether through healing, understanding, or release, it returns. Not as revenge, but as opportunity. The universe, in a sense, is giving us another chance to master what we didn't quite get the first time. That's why many people experience the same patterns over and over: same toxic relationships, same financial struggles, same abandonment wounds, same career blocks. You may even hear someone say, "Why does this keep happening to me?" The answer from a karmic lens is that it's happening for you, so you can finally see it clearly enough to break free. Let's take a public figure like Robert Downey Jr. His early career was meteoric, but drug addiction nearly destroyed him. After several arrests and personal collapses, he hit rock bottom. Yet through years of recovery and deep inner work, he transformed himself into one of the most respected actors in Hollywood. From a karmic perspective, this journey could reflect a soul confronting addiction themes carried from other lifetimes, learning accountability, rebuilding integrity, and understanding the power of rebirth. Repetition is the soul's teacher. It's why so many mystic traditions talk about samsara, the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, as a classroom, not a prison. Until a lesson is fully learned and integrated, the soul repeats it, much like repeating a grade in school. That's not failure, it's grace. The universe is patient with your growth. You might, for example, attract emotionally unavailable partners lifetime after lifetime, not because you're cursed, but because your soul is learning self worth and emotional boundaries. Or perhaps you always find yourself in leadership roles that end in betrayal. That could be your soul exploring the tension between power and trust. Every theme that repeats is a thread. Pull it gently, and you'll begin to see the karmic pattern underneath. Spiritual teachers like Ram Dass have emphasized this concept beautifully. In his teachings, he spoke about how we all come into this life with curriculum. We don't always choose what happens to us, but we do choose the framework, what kind of lessons we're here to learn. And those lessons tend to repeat until they're no longer needed. Sometimes karma isn't about big events, it's about micro choices. How you respond to a rude cashier, how you handle conflict, how you speak when no one is listening. Every action either continues an old karmic cycle or helps close it. The point of karma isn't to make you paranoid, it's to make you conscious. And as the soul matures, the nature of the karma it works with becomes more refined. Early soul incarnations might wrestle with survival, violence, greed, lust, or power. But as you evolve, karma becomes more nuanced: pride, control, forgiveness, grief, compassion. The curriculum deepens. The more awake you become to your karmic patterns, the more power you have to shift them, not by force, but by presence. By saying, "This again, good. Now I can choose differently." In that moment, karma is no longer your prison, it becomes your teacher and your path to liberation. Soul maturity, the true test of how many lives you've lived. Soul maturity isn't something you can fake. It's not about how many spiritual books you've read, how many yoga retreats you've attended, or how eloquently you talk about the universe. It's about how you show up when life tests you, quietly, consistently, and with presence. In fact, if you really want to know how many lifetimes your soul has lived, don't look at how spiritual someone says they are. Look at how they respond to chaos, failure, or conflict. That's where true soul age shows up. Younger souls tend to be reactive. They want to win. They need to be right. They chase success, crave attention, and struggle with emotional regulation. That doesn't make them bad. It just means they're in earlier stages of spiritual development, focused more on external validation than internal awareness. Older souls, by contrast, respond, not react. They're slower to judge, more compassionate when faced with imperfection, and less likely to be shaken by uncertainty. They've seen enough, lost enough, and grown enough across lifetimes to know that very little in life is truly permanent. And because of that, they carry a kind of calm emotional gravity. They don't need to prove anything. They just are. A great modern example of this is Fred Rogers. Yes, Mr. Rogers. He embodied emotional depth, quiet wisdom, and unwavering gentleness in a world obsessed with speed and spectacle. He didn't shout to be heard. He whispered, and the world leaned in. That's the frequency of an old, mature soul. It's not loud, it's deeply present. You also see signs of soul maturity in how someone handles forgiveness. Younger souls often hold grudges, they need justice. Older souls see that clinging to resentment is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to suffer. They forgive not to excuse the hurt, but to free themselves and move forward. It's not passive, it's power expressed through grace. Another sign is comfort with solitude. Old souls aren't afraid of being alone. In fact, they often need it. Not because they're antisocial, but because silence is where their deepest growth happens. They don't fear the quiet, they seek it because they've learned that most of life's answers aren't out there, they're in here. And let's talk about values. Younger souls tend to measure success by achievement, money, fame, possessions. Older souls measure it in meaning, connection, peace, and service. You won't find them chasing trends or validation. They're more interested in leaving something behind that actually matters. Even spiritually, mature souls aren't dazzled by mystical experiences. They don't need to see angels or feel energy surges to believe. They trust their path, even when it's invisible. They've been through enough lifetimes to know real growth is quiet, it's steady, and it usually happens in the most ordinary moments. Soul maturity also shows up in emotional resilience. When the job falls through, when the relationship ends, when the diagnosis comes, they may cry, yes, they may struggle, but they don't unravel. They grieve with presence, they process with honesty, and slowly they rise again, wiser, softer, and stronger. Ultimately, soul maturity isn't about having it all figured out. It's about knowing that you never fully will and being okay with that. It's about walking through life with a deep awareness that every experience is part of something larger, something sacred, even if you can't see the whole picture. So if you find yourself choosing peace over power, compassion over control, presence over performance, you may not just be growing. You may be remembering. Are you nearing your final life? The idea that some people may be living their final life on Earth sounds dramatic, but in spiritual traditions around the world, it's actually a quiet, sacred milestone. When a soul approaches the end of its reincarnation cycle, it often begins to sense a subtle shift, not in the external world, but in the internal compass. There's an urgency, not to do more, but to understand more, to forgive deeply, to live simply, and to love without conditions. This is what many Eastern philosophies call moksha in Hinduism or nirvana in Buddhism, the liberation from the cycle of birth and death. But even outside those traditions, countless spiritual seekers have reported a similar inner sensation that something is coming to a close. This lifetime carries a sense of finality, not in a fatalistic way, but as a kind of soul-level completion. One of the most recognizable signs of this is an early spiritual awakening. People nearing their final incarnation often begin asking life's biggest questions at a very young age. Why am I here? What is truth? What is my role in humanity's evolution? This isn't just philosophical curiosity, it's an echo of lifetimes of seeking, finally converging into a deeper knowing. Look at someone like Eckhart Tolle. His spiritual transformation happened in his late 20s after a period of intense depression. He describes a moment of ego death where the self he thought he was completely dissolved and what remained was pure awareness. Since then, his teachings have centered on stillness, presence, and detachment from the material self. These are not the goals of someone chasing success. They're the values of someone wrapping up their karmic work. Souls nearing their final incarnation also tend to detach naturally from worldly rewards. It's not that they reject success or relationships, they just don't cling to them. Whether it's fame, fortune, recognition, or even romantic love, they begin to see through the illusion of permanence. There's a sense that these things are lovely, but they're not everything. The real work is inner, and often they go through immense inner trials. Not because they're being punished, but because the soul is clearing out deep final layers of unresolved karma. Emotional wounds that have carried over from lifetime to lifetime rise to the surface, not to harm, but to heal. That's why those on the path of completion may experience years of solitude, loss, or deep emotional transformation. It's the soul releasing what no longer serves its next phase. They also experience what some call karmic acceleration. Lessons come faster. People arrive in their life for a short but intense period. The old ways of coping, blame, denial, distraction no longer work. Everything that once numbed the pain begins to feel hollow. Why? Because their soul is demanding truth. Real, raw, liberating truth. Another clue, they begin to feel a desire to serve others, not for ego, but as a natural expression of who they are. Many final life souls become healers, teachers, counselors, or quiet anchors in their communities. They don't always have titles. You may never see them on a stage, but their presence feels like home. Even their relationship with death changes. Instead of fearing the end, they often develop a calm acceptance of it, or even curiosity. Not because they're giving up on life, but because they intuitively know that death is not an ending. It's simply the final chapter before graduation. Of course, only the soul truly knows if this is its last round. But if you resonate with these patterns, deep spiritual hunger, emotional depth, a calling to love bigger and live quieter, you just might be closer to the edge of completion than you realize. And from that place, life doesn't feel like a race anymore. It feels like a return. Relationships, soul families, and unfinished business. If you've ever met someone and felt an immediate, intense reaction, either love, deep trust, or even discomfort, you may have just encountered a soul from your soul family. These connections defy logic. They feel ancient, charged, and often emotionally complicated. Why? Because they are. These aren't just relationships formed in this lifetime. They're part of a much older spiritual web. In many metaphysical teachings, it's believed that souls incarnate in groups. These are often referred to as soul families, soul pods, or soul clusters. You might have 5, 10, or even 100 souls that you've reincarnated with over and over again, playing different roles each time. A mother in this life could have been your child in another. A best friend might have been your rival. A romantic partner could have once been your spiritual teacher. This revolving cast of soul relationships isn't random. Each life brings the opportunity to resolve karma, deepen connection, or heal a wound left unresolved in previous incarnations. A great example of this dynamic is Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton. Their relationship was famously intense. They married twice, divorced twice, and yet never fully let go of one another. While modern psychology might label it as codependent, from a soul perspective, such passionate, cyclic dynamics often reflect unfinished emotional contracts, bonds that require multiple lifetimes to resolve. You'll often know when a karmic connection is playing out because the relationship feels bigger than it should be. The emotional stakes are higher, things escalate quickly, or you feel like you've known them forever, even if you've just met. And sometimes the relationship ends in pain. That doesn't mean it failed. It may have served its purpose to bring buried feelings to the surface so they can be healed once and for all. These karmic relationships can be romantic, familial, or even professional. That overbearing boss, that friend who betrayed you, that sibling rivalry that never really cooled down, these could all be soul agreements set in motion long before this lifetime began. They're not punishments, they're part of your soul's curriculum. Sometimes the person you feel the strongest rejection or resentment toward is actually the soul that has helped you grow the most. That's the paradox of karmic ties. From the human lens, it looks like heartbreak or chaos. From the soul's view, it's evolution in action. Another fascinating concept is that of the twin soul or twin flame, a soul so deeply connected to yours that encountering them feels like a mirror has been placed in front of your spirit. These relationships can be blissful or turbulent, depending on how much inner healing has already occurred. Think of the kind of connection where you're not just in love, you're transformed. And then there's the unfinished business. If you keep encountering the same emotional dynamics in different relationships, abandonment, betrayal, feeling unseen, it's not just bad luck. It's likely your soul attempting to complete a karmic loop. These cycles will repeat with different people and faces until you finally make a new choice, one rooted in self-awareness rather than old fear. Recognizing soul family relationships isn't about labeling people or holding on to pain. It's about seeing the deeper story, the energetic pattern that stretches beyond this one life. When you can look at someone not for what they did, but for what they stirred in you, you begin to unlock the hidden architecture of your soul's journey. And maybe, just maybe, that understanding is the very thing that finally sets you both free. Soul memory, the whisper of the eternal self. Soul memory doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It doesn't come wrapped in logic or clear explanation. Instead, it whispers, softly, persistently, until you can no longer ignore its call. You might be doing something ordinary, walking through a museum, listening to a piece of music, standing quietly in an ancient cathedral, and suddenly your eyes well up with tears, or your chest tightens without a clear reason. Perhaps it's when you see a photograph of a place you've never visited, but feel inexplicably drawn to, or when a stranger's gaze lingers just a moment too long, stirring something ancient within you. This is soul memory at work. The soul carries the imprints of every life it has lived, not just as images or facts, but as deep emotional and energetic blueprints. These memories are not stored in the brain, but woven into the very fabric of our being. Like dreams, poetry, or déjà vu, they arrive nonlinear, symbolic, and deeply felt. Hard to explain in words, yet unmistakable when experienced. Consider Barbara Streisand, who often speaks of a profound connection to Old World Europe, the emotional pull she feels when performing certain songs. Or Carl Jung, who believed many dreams and intuitions stem from an ancestral or transpersonal source, something older than our individual self. For many, these soul memories surface as longing, a deep yearning for something unknown in this life, a hunger for spiritual depth, for inner truth, for something unnamed, a persistent feeling that something is missing, even when life looks full on the surface. Others feel it as sudden, intense emotional responses, unexplained grief, irrational fears, or spontaneous waves of love or sorrow when meeting someone or visiting a place. Imagine walking through the ruins of Greece on vacation, overwhelmed by emotion, as if you left something behind there. Perhaps you have. And then there are moments of unshakable knowing. When hearing a spiritual teaching for the first time, you think, I've always known this. Or when trying a meditation practice that feels as natural as breathing, not coincidence, but remembrance. As we awaken, these soul memories rise to the surface, not to confuse us, but to complete us. They invite us to remember who we are beneath personality, conditioning, and story, to reconnect with the ancient self that has journeyed through centuries, gathered wisdom, and waited patiently for this moment of recognition. This call to remember is gentle, not demanding. It pulls us towards stillness, truth, and home. The more you listen, not with your ears, but with your heart, the clearer it becomes, not louder, but unmistakably certain. It may come through journaling, dreams, silence, prayer, or the eyes of someone who sees you without needing explanation. It may arise when you stop searching and simply start being. Mystics have always said, what you seek is already within, not within your mind, but within your soul's memory. So if you've ever felt there's something just beyond your conscious reach that you're meant to remember, you're not imagining it, you're awakening. And as you trust that quiet knowing, the pieces fall into place, not because you've figured it all out, but because you finally remembered what was always there. You are not just a personality, you are a journey. So, how many lives have you lived? Maybe the number doesn't matter as much as this. Every ache you've felt, every gift you've carried without knowing why, every whisper in your heart that says, I've known this before, they all come from somewhere far older than this life. It's not imagination. It's the voice of a soul that has walked through centuries, that has learned, loved, lost, and is now slowly remembering. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are not lost. You are becoming. And when you choose to remember, not just who you are now, but who you've been across lifetimes, you allow your soul to write its next chapter, a chapter free from fear, free from urgency, filled only with peace, presence, and unconditional love. You're watching Awakened Wisdom, a space where we explore the soul's journey, the truth of reincarnation, and the timeless wisdom that lives within us all. If today's message touched something deeper within you, please subscribe to continue receiving insights like this. Like the video if it felt aligned with your path, and leave a comment below. I'm starting to remember if you feel your soul beginning to awaken. Or share your experience. Have you ever dreamed of a place that felt like home, even though you've never been there? Have you ever met someone and felt like you've known them forever? Leave your mark. Because what you share might just help someone else remember who they truly are. We'll see you in the next video where we'll continue walking together on the sacred journey of remembering.